What's going on, folks? Welcome back to Bed Boys, your one-stop shop for all your energy drink reviews and performance talks. I'm Christian,
I'm Brian.
and we are the Bed Boys. So we got a solo episode coming here today, just the hosts. We have had a couple of really good guests on recently, so if you haven't checked those episodes out, definitely look at those. But today we're just riding solo or duo here. We got some good topics. We were talking about this right before we hit record, and I'm excited to get into it. But first, let's Ryan's got something a little special for us on the energy drink side. So why don't we get into that first?
Yeah. So two things. Number one, Alani Nu was just purchased by Celsius for like $1.2 billion. So that's massive. Um, it's kind of like two powerhouse companies coming together, both of who have been historically ranked pretty low on Bev Boys. So interesting to see, but they both follow like the same formula anyway of a 12-ounce skinny can. So like production wise, it'll probably be around the same in my opinion, either super sweet or like kind of way too sugary flavors. 200 milligrams per can. So like, I think it's a smart move by Celsius to acquire another large brand and bolster their brand. Does it help or hurt the industry? More than likely, probably does nothing. If
Yeah,
I'm being honest. What you'll see is probably like Alani Nu available in more gas stations and stuff like that instead of just from their direct manufacturer and like online orders or like a GNC or like a Vitamin Shop. So those you'll likely start to see in places outside of those like larger conglomerates and in the more independent gas stations, things like that, small grocery stores, boutique stuff. But I don't know. It doesn't. I don't think it weighs as much as the Ghost acquisition by Dr Pepper. Whereas like Dr Pepper Keurig like purchasing Ghost and having like the distribution rights through Anheuser Busch, that's a way better move in my opinion. And they kept creative control, so like Dan is still at the helm of it. But we'll see how that kind of shakes up the industry, especially with Celsius being mainly like a canned energy drink. I don't know if they purchased the entire Alani Nu brand or if it was just the Alani Nu beverage, and purchased the rights to that. So we'll see, but you can't hate
point.
the player, hate the game. You know, anytime somebody sells something for 1.2 billion, like you gotta give kudos and props to
Yeah,
that.
expect that.
Yeah, regardless of the product. But I have another update, and that is the energy drink I have today. Red Bull has recently revamped its Zero. Um, and you can see like there's a small difference in the can. So like I know my lighting is going to be a little off, but the Zero can is more like flat tones versus like that chrome, like real glossy, shiny metallic. And the reason like that is to just bring a little bit of difference to the difference of the ingredients in here, and that this sweetener is no longer sucralose in the Zero. In the Zero, the sweetener is now monk fruit extract. So it's a little bit less, I guess, I don't want to say like harsh or chemically or, or like bad
More
sweeteners.
natural, air
Yeah,
quotes.
exactly, quote unquote, like more natural.
I mean,
Um,
it is more natural. Don't even do air
technically, yeah.
quotes. It
Yeah.
really is.
I just don't want to get into the aspect of like demonizing like sucralose or
Yeah,
I mean aspartame in obscene amounts. Like if I were to eat like a pound of it a day, could develop cancer. But I'm not doing that as much as I do drink energy drinks. So,
yeah,
and sucralose, I think that's probably one of the best tasting, like 0 calorie sweeteners.
agreed.
Erythritol tends to have like a real like almost like metallic-y can and like weird aftertaste. Aspartame isn't terrible, but it gives a little bit of the same thing. Sucralose has been the most consistent. It's 0 calories. It's what everybody uses because it's cheap and it's not terrible tasting. It doesn't really affect flavors as much. But monk fruit, that's like the big difference. The can again, a little bit different on like the lighter, more like matte side, but monk fruit extract is the big player in the game. There still is erythritol in here though, so we'll see how that kind of plays out on that aspect. And still
Nice.
some sucralose, but I think they're just there as like finishing touches versus like the base main sweetener. So while monk fruit is the main driver, there's still two artificial sweeteners in there. So we'll see what the dealio is with that.
Yeah, pop that top there, crispy.
Oh, still smells like Red Bull, like the classic battery acid. Like I don't care what anyone says, that I love it.
OD.
Like like same thing with like a Monster. But what do you got for us?
I got the old reliable here. I was just talking to Brian. I said I need to go. There's a gas station that's a little bit further away from me. I'd probably have to go like 30 minutes, but where you can get actual like white monsters, more American type energy drinks. But if you've been listening since I moved down here, the Citrus Twist Sparkling Ice is probably my favorite sparkling ice flavor. Again, only 70 milligrams of caffeine. I'm just going to go ahead and pop it. But it tastes just like a Sprite. So good tasting, pretty light on the caffeine. But, if you want to crush like four of them a day, that's also cool. Side note, Brian, when you said that Red Bull has like the matte finish, I immediately thought of cars for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, the reason is every like Friday and Saturday night around where I live, I will go on a walk. And Friday and Saturday night down by like the marina where there's like these nice, like more bougie restaurants. People will be driving these exotic cars. It's crazy, like in Boca Chica, Dominican Republic. Um, and like I saw like a red Ferrari yesterday. I shit you not,
Oh,
like a legit
so
Ferrari.
gorgeous.
Um, like BMWs, Maybachs, like it's just kind of ridiculous. Like you just walk down there and you have people driving like $1 million cars, but you'd
Yeah,
appreciate that.
I would. What's crazy about Ferrari? So like when you purchase a Ferrari, you have a purchaser agreement to not recolor any of like their iconic finishes, not debadge the car or anything like that. So like when you see like a discolored Ferrari, like they technically broke their purchaser agreement, and Ferrari can do two things. They can get the car back. So like you can like vacate your payment and they'll take the car back. Especially on like a Ferrari like 458, which is like the marquee like hypercar Ferrari. Now they will release them in some of like the additional colors, like you'll see like some matte grays and stuff like that. But like if it comes in red, you're not allowed to repaint that. Um, and like I said, the two things could happen. They could try to take the car back, or you will never like you get like blacklisted from Ferrari. So
Wow.
like you will never purchase a Ferrari again. And what's really crazy is like Ferrari, Porsche, like the high end like Mercedes, all the like a Lamborghini, like a lot of those. Actually, not Lamborghini. I correct myself here, but a lot of these like hyper cars, not so like there's luxury, sport, there's sports, luxury, uh, super, and hyper cars. So like in the super and hyper car, that's like those like really nice Ferraris, those really nice Porsches, those Lamborghinis, and then the hyper is like the GT3 RS Porsche, the Ferrari 458, the Lamborghini like Aventador versus the Huracan. In order to get to that hypercar category, you have to purchase like a set amount of like those cars before then where you get an allocation. So like you don't get to just walk in. So like I'll use Porsche for example. Like you can't just walk in and purchase a Porsche GT3 RS. You have to get that in as an allocation where they call you and say, "Hey, we have one on the lot or we have one that we're going to build. You've bought 5 cars from us. Do you want first grabs at this?" Like the way that works is like you'll have to buy like a 718, a 718 Spider, just a regular 911, a 911 Turbo, a Panamera, Taycan, whatever. You have to purchase like 5 cars, and then you get into like a lottery pool where they'll call you and say like, "Oh, you've purchased enough. We think you're part of the club. You can purchase this GT3 RS." So like
Wow.
the back end side of it is insane, and you're starting to see it a little bit more, I think, and not to draw too many like relations to like the sports industry, but I think you're starting to see a little bit more of it in that aspect of like these limited releases and limited like drops. So like what they'll do is Podium did this. Podium is a sports brand, sports nutrition brand. I think Raw did a little bit where it's like you build up enough. It's on a much smaller scale, so you build up these membership points and you get your tiered membership bonuses. Ghost did it as well, and then like once you hit a certain threshold of those points and that threshold of like your tier in your loyalty program, well then they get the early access to when there's a new drop or a new flavor. They get it 24, 48 hours, 72 hours in advance, so they could potentially buy all those up before they go out to market.
Wow. Bad
So we're
Boys
starting to see some of that.
turning into the lives of the rich and shameless here.
I know.
Um,
Um,
damn.
but yeah, and then speaking of ghosts, not to get too much on the, I've done some research over the past couple of days here. Ghost is releasing a brand new flavor. It is a peach flavor of their energy drink,
I did see that. Saw it on their
which
Instagram.
very excited for that. You know how we feel about peach here. It can either be done really well or really bad.
Yes.
If someone's going to probably do it right, it'll probably be Ghost. And they also have a limited edition flavor that's really only sourced to like nightclubs and bars or like special event spaces like the Vegas Golden Knights in the lounge that Ghost has there. They
It's
have
like
like
the
their like,
original, right?
yeah,
Is
yep,
that going to
it's
be
the
like
original.
their take on like the classic Red Bull or like OG Monster flavor? That'll be
Yep.
interesting. I don't know
And
if
it's
I'll even
made
get my hands on one. You'll probably have a better chance. You got to go out clubbing.
I gotta go out clubbing. I gotta go out clubbing. I think there might be a shot to get some of it. I'm gonna try and scour a little bit. Maybe we can get a review on that. But it's weird too because those come in like an 8 or a 12 ounce can. Like the goal behind it is that it's specifically served as like an alcoholic drink. So kind of neat in that perspective, and that they really don't want it to be like their flagship like flavor. They just want to be able to support that piece of the industry, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. Side note on Ferrari, didn't I don't follow F1 hardly at all, but I saw that Lewis Hamilton signed with Ferrari. That was a while back though.
Yeah, he did. So like that's I mean F1 wise, like that's super big. Like him leaving Mercedes, um, it's that's a big deal. And for lack of a better term, he's probably the number one driver in the world. So seeing him come through and sign with like a major brand like Ferrari, that pushes for the longest time like Ferrari wasn't in the lead pack because you had Lewis Hamilton. Max Verstappen wasn't really with Ferrari either. Like these guys who are the best drivers in the world, they're helping build their cars. So like it's not just, and I don't want to say it's them like putting in, the actual wrenches and stuff, but they're giving these exact specifications of how they like to drive, and these entire teams around them build these cars around how this person drives. Um, so I'll be very interested to see like the reality of like Hamilton like getting on with Ferrari. Like, does he have that same relationship with the team around him? The way like Mercedes was willing to kind of like, hey, we're gonna make this car so you can drive it, not you're gonna get in our car and drive. Whereas a little bit like towards the past, it seemed like I can't say for sure, but it seemed like Ferrari was more like get in that car and you're gonna drive that car, versus like we're gonna build something that we'll put the gas pedal 4 inches above, and your switches will be this way because that's how you like to drive. So that'll be another
Right?
cool thing too. Not to get too much into cars. I know I've like kind of rattled already.
No, no, that's good stuff.
Mm.
Um, but okay, this is raw and uncut. Are you getting any kickback like from my audio wise? Because I'm using the Riverside app, and this is the first time I've used it. A little
Yeah,
bit.
it's a little like laggy, so I see your voice move, but it'll come through right on the actual recording. Thank God for Riverside. Not a plug, but if you guys are interested, hit us up. I think we might actually have like a little referral code.
Cool.
But the cool thing about this is that even if we're talking and maybe I have bad internet or French down in the DR has bad internet, it still syncs a recording of him singular and sends that over, so it's all matched up perfectly. So shout out
Okay.
Riverside.
Sick.
We'll find that code. Maybe we drop it in the link in our description or something. But
Oh yeah,
that's a nice
which
part.
is which is good because I often do have bad internet down here. So it's
I think I
clutch.
had some last time we recorded when we were on with Gabe. I had some bad internet.
Yep. Yep.
Hmm.
But dude, we were talking about some pretty good topics before we started to hit record. So let's
Yeah.
dive into some of those. Do you want to? Let's start with yours. Talking about, I asked you about Elon football training, how that's been going. Um,
Hmm.
I'm just going to leave it at that and let you take it from here, and then I'll hop in.
Yeah, like the base of the conversation is a lot of like big lifts. And when I say big lifts, I mean like, we might be hitting like a chained RFE squat on our dynamic day and we're doing 18 sets of two, or we're doing like a long APRE bench or a front squat day or an RDL day, which for the most part, you see that and you're like, that's a lot of volume. That's going to take a lot of time. We modify that. Thankfully, Nick's a genius and, he does a lot of the programming, especially in the gym, almost 99.99% of it. And we sit there and coach. But the cool thing about this is that you see a difference in systems. And one of the biggest things was flipping all the accessories first versus having your big lift be first. And this goes back to like, I think a more classic argument versus instead of, the stupid Olympic lifts versus loaded jumps kind of movement here. But it was really, do you do your single joint accessories or your just accessory work first, or do you do your large, energy demanding, expansive stuff first, or your compound lifts, for lack of a better term? Um, so this is kind of neat. So the classical kind of look at it is that you do the things that demand the most energy first. So if we look at it from a perspective of being a coach and you're in an off season, you're like, I'm going to do my prep. I'm going to do all my field work. So all my sprinting, my change of direction, a lot of my like, I guess like locomotive jumping. So like through the entire plane, we're going to do all that first. And then we're going to come into the weight room. And then my weight room has its own categories where we're going to do our explosives or our very dynamic and fast stuff. And then we're going to do our energy demanding, like compound lifts, where a lot of like musculature, it's a global stressor. And then we'll hit our small single joint accessories. That's kind of like the classical look at it. For the most part, it looks the same. The only difference is instead of doing your compound lift first, we've moved that to like the more so like the back, other than like a couple like ISOs for accessories, and moved all those accessories, like the single joint stuff, into the beginning of the lift. And it looks like a 3 station prep, 3 to 4 exercises per station. You'll have some correctives with hip mobility, shoulder mobility on an upper body day. So you'll see a lot of pails, rails, things like that. Wall walks for shoulder stability, pike push-ups, hand release push-ups, L-sits, inverted rows, dumbbell rows, seated overhead press. I mean, the list goes on and on of these less fatiguing movements that you'll see than like the compound itself, but still enough. And it kind of reigns true in like some different areas. So like, again, I mentioned Bondarchuk, but like Bondarchuk supported the idea of you do all your single joint stuff first, and it helps prime the system in order to be more successful in those compound lifts, which were the main basis of the lift. Basically you're treating all your accessories as the extension of the prep. The other aspect is you look at it from like a bodybuilding standpoint. A lot of bodybuilders, when they first go into the gym, I know you're going to love this. You're going to love this exact word,
Exhaust, baby.
the pre-exhaustion phase, right? You
That's the
get that
first thing I
pre-fatigue.
thought of.
Mm-hmm. I knew you'd love that, right? And the pre-exhaustion works in two different ways. A, you fight through some fog. That's like the non, I guess like the non like biological response is like you're learning to fight through some fatigue and actually perform and execute what you're looking for, in a manner to the best extent. Some people argue that that's not really a thing, blah, 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 blah. Neither here nor there. The second aspect is pre-exhaustion allows to reach muscular failure, or at least close to near muscular failure, to a 9 out of 10 RPE or a 1 RIR. You'll get more muscular growth, right? And in a deep off season, in the aspect to where we are going to be more in a strength phase in like the month of like January to middle of February, you're still sprinting, vertical integration. So all of your qualities are present. We're just going to emphasize one of them, and that's going to be that true, like more max strength, a little bit more on like the hypertrophy phase. And I want to like clarify, like hypertrophy is not just, hey, 4x12, this very lightweight, high volume work. Hypertrophy is something that occurs when muscular tissue is damaged and rebuilt. Hypertrophy can be done at low volume and high intensity as long as you reach that muscular fatigue and you're eating to support the amount of effort, if not over the amount to support the efforts being done. That's why you see a lot of bodybuilders do some singles, some doubles, some triples. And just like you would see powerlifters go through. Powerlifters aren't necessarily small humans. Like, let's be honest here, especially in like those upper weight classes, those 220s, those heavyweights, like they're big guys and they're not necessarily hitting 4x12, 4 by this, 5x10. They're hitting singles, doubles, triples, but a lot of them. That's why that's like why hypertrophy clusters works, because it's still high volume, just inverting your sets and reps with shorter rest. But that pre-exhaustion phase really does help. And I think we've seen some steadily growth on body mass, lean body mass, as well as just pure size and strength, which is kind of neat to see. And it's not something that everybody does. So it might look a little weird, but it's been really fun. And it keeps you a little bit more, as a coach, I will say, it keeps you a little bit more kind of involved from the start than necessarily, because a lot of times what happens is, and I'll say this, everybody's been there. You go through the field work, you're so into it, you're looking for every position, everything to look perfect and everything to look right and get what you want. You get in there, you hit your explosives, everyone's juiced up, you get the compound lifts. Everybody loves a big, heavy compound lift, or coaching, like the ones who might not know it. It's a lot more involved. And then you kind of feel that like a little bit of drop off, right? Where, all right, go hit your accessories, go hit some chin-ups. But when you flip that, well, now you're coaching that prep, because that prep might change every day and it's just your accessories and it might look a little bit different because it's different variations. So you got to coach that. You got to be involved in it. And then you save that last piece and then you're like, well, I got to coach these compounds because they're important and they're fun to coach, etc. Well, I got to be involved the whole time. So there is like that little bit of like awakening, I guess, for me.
No, it's a good point. Yeah, I feel like this is for you guys like the perfect time of year to do that. Like you probably, I mean, maybe you would do it later in the year, but like doing that pre-exhaust method now that you're probably not doing as much field work. Um, and everyone knows this. Like a lot of times when you warm up on a compound, that's your first movement, you just kind of feel shitty until like the second or third set. Like you don't feel great right away. That's why like pyramid sets work, because
Mhm.
you go a little bit heavier, and you don't really get warmed up until that third or fourth set. I would assume that's pretty much a non-factor at that point when you've already done all your accessory works. Um, and you hop right into that 18 by 2, which I also like because you talked about it, like 18 sets is a lot, but 2 reps, that's 36 reps. That's not a lot. You do 4 by 10 and that's more reps than that. So like you said with the hypertrophy, it's not as much about, you don't need to do sets of 8 or 10. You can if you want, but it's more so about like getting close to failure, total time under tension, and then the nutrition piece is obviously key. So I think that's sick. Um,
Exactly. Yeah. And there's other ways to attack it too. Um, I've been talking to Nick about this, and I stole a piece of it just for like my own training. I'm gonna have some track and field runners do it who might not be competing at conference and may need a little bit of additional like kind of push and like the general strength kind of adaptation. And it's like a density set, right? To where maybe it's not, hey, you're gonna hit 5 sets of 2 after you know your pyramid set to get up there. So like a 5-3-3 warm up or a 5-3-1 warm up, but instead, it's like, hey, you have time. You're going to collect as many reps as you can during this period, right? So it's almost like putting a high intensity, escalating density interval in the middle of your working set. And that would be like, so for me, like, for example, here I'm going to use it on a front squat with some of my girls. They're going to go a 5-3-3 warm up, working up to about 80%. Then I'm going to have them kind of back off. And their back off set is 1 set, but the set isn't necessarily a set number of reps. It's 3 minutes. All right. So now you have 3 minutes. During that 3 minutes at around 75%, you're going to get as many reps as possible. I don't care if you hit a set of 8, a set of 7, a set of 5, a set of 3. If you hit 20 singles, whatever it is, you're going to hit as many reps as you can in that 3 minutes. You can unrack it and rack it as much as you want, but I need you to get some time under tension and hit some muscular failure. So that's another great way of doing it too. And I wish I could say that that was my idea. I think the way I'm doing it is probably my idea, but I took the basis of it from Nick, and he really took the basis of it from how he programs for his CrossFit gym that he's programming for with NBD. And it's a cool idea, and it breaks up like the steady monotonous of like, I got a set of 5, I got a set of 5, or I got a set of 6, I got a set of 8. It's like, hey, I need you to stay involved for 3 minutes and just grit this out. And we're going to train hard because we got some time before your next your outdoor meets. So why not address this? We got to hit our strength residual. I need to do enough to get there. I think this will do it. You're going to be sore the next day, but it'll dissipate by, the next Monday.
Yeah, I love that. I do that with within my own training and um, when I do like, write a remote program for someone, I'll do that with like accessory work at the end, especially like
Mm-hmm.
any like torso work where it's like, when you get to the end of your workout, okay, let me hit my 3 sets of 10, fucking abs, whatever. It's kind of half-assed, but it's okay. 2 exercises, sets of 10 on both, 5-minute AMRAP. Let's go. See how many sets you can get, and then we'll go 6 minutes the next week. Just switches it up a little bit, or like giant sets. Like, okay, you got 50 total reps. I don't care how you get it, just try to get it. Yeah, man. Like for compounds or accessories, honestly. Um, and I think it really challenges the athlete to, I don't want to say like get creative, but you'll see like
They got to
one
figure out
person,
their training.
right? Like if you do that and you have, whatever, 75% on the bar, I don't know what percent, if you hit a set of 10, you're probably gonna need a lot more rest versus like if you just hit sets of like 6. Or like some person might find like, okay, if I just hit triples with 20 seconds of rest, then I can get more reps than just doing one balls out set and then I have to rest until I have only 30 seconds left. And so
Now
I
I'm
think that
struggling.
forces, exactly, I think that forces people to kind of learn, you know,
How to train.
exactly. And yeah, I was talking with a coach when I was out in Colorado and I visited University of Denver. One of their assistants I was talking to, and he was saying like, yeah, I have like an idea I want to try out like in early off season with like some VBT, and I just want to say like, okay, like you have to get like a total power output for the day on this movement, like X amount of watts, and just kind of see how people solve that problem. Doesn't matter. He was going to let them choose the exercise as well. It was going to be like, okay, exercise category, now go. And you'd see like, the people that were maybe like super strong do it with maximal weights. Maybe the people that are more explosive, they're going to do that with like loaded jumps, stuff like that. So I like stuff like that where it just switches it up a little bit. It doesn't have to be like the bread and butter of your program, but I mean, it just breaks up the monotony. I've been going through a lot of Mladen Jovanovich's stuff. He,
Mm-hmm.
he's got like a lot of stuff on like set rep schemes, just ways to like progress intensity, volume, versus like RIR versus percentage drop, um, the ballistic versus like the grinding rep schemes. And he's a super smart dude. A lot of that is kind of over my head, but like you don't always have to be, 3x5 or 5x3. It's good to mix it up a little bit.
I think so. And it's just something that's kind of underrated. It's like a little bit of creativity on the aspect of it doesn't have to look one way or another. And I think a lot of people, as they get a little bit more into the industry, they get past this. It's got to look like this. It has to look like this. It has to look like this into more of, well, we can figure out a creative way to get the same adaptation without it being stale for the athlete and keep them involved, which unfortunately, whatever you want to say about it, like, yes, the simple stuff works, but that's not always who you're dealing with. You're not going to deal with these type A athletes who just want to be the best regardless of what it looks like. you have to find a way to bring that bottom, if we look at like a Pareto chart, you got to bring that bottom 10% up, and then that 80% who they want to get better, but they do have that like faltering of like, maybe I'm not going to be as involved in this, like mentally, like you got to keep them engaged, and it just is what it is.
Yeah, 100%. No, that's sick. One thing I wanted to talk about, something I've been thinking about a little bit lately is, I'm sure you've played around with the force plates and just thinking about even before you had the force plates deal on, what
Mhm.
is power to you, and is like power training, quote unquote, is that like a thing? What does it mean to you? I just got done reading a Baba book, Organization Training for Sports, super good book, and it basically talked about like how power itself, he didn't view power itself as a biomotor quality, but a combination of maximal strength and maximal speed. So you train both sides of the curve, and you're going to get more powerful. And you'll hear people talking about like, okay, power training is jumps, Olympic lifts, stuff like that. But if we think about, and the reason I brought up force plates is force plates, they seem like fancy technology, but they really only measure two things: force and time, and then everything else you get from that is derived from force and time.
In the
Um,
calculations.
exactly. The calculations aren't as simple, but the plates
Yeah.
itself measure just force and time, and everything else is a derivative of force and time. Um, for all you physics people out there, is what does power training mean to you, and is it even a thing? This can go a lot of different ways. I know people got varying opinions on it. Some people think DBT is like the key to that. Some people think it's just training both sides of the curve. Sprint fast, lift heavy, and the middle will take care of itself. I want to hear your take on it as a coach that deals with primarily strength power sports. Football, track and field sprinters. So
Yeah. So, loaded question, to be honest. So, like, I'm okay with that. But I see both sides of the argument, right? You keep the main thing when we are on the track and we are sprinting, right? I want my girls going as fast as possible. And I want them, when they go into the weight room, to be able to push a lot of weight. That's great. But when it's too overly simplistic, even though we can stack those days as a war of attrition, you start to lack the dynamics of the aspects, right? So I think of like in the convergence model, right? It's not just the force produced, but it's the magnitude at which it's produced. It's the vector at which it goes. It's the joint angles and the musculature, right? All those like specific things, like that's what develops into what I would consider power. Again, gonna go back to this ripping off DeMarco, but right, DeMarco has a really good anecdote for this, and it was explosives. And what his definition of explosives makes sense to me, and that was, what is an explosive? It is the athlete distributing the necessary amount of like physical exertion, whether it be power, speed, dynamics, force, whatever, to accomplish the sporting action, right? So, what does that look like in sport? In sport, if it's like catching a football, maybe it's a release at 100%, tempering down to 80% of max speed in order to make a cut on the route and then jump. But if you jump and you only have to jump as high as you need to, not necessarily an all out effort, well, then you can catch the ball, make the catch, and possibly score a touchdown. But then you get into like training residuals or like speed reserve, as like a lack of a better term. You're much more capable and set up to accomplish that if your maximum sprint speed is, say, 10.5 meters per second. Well, when I temper that down to 80%, and I'm around 8.6, 8.7 meters per second, but I'm able to recover faster when someone else's top speed is 9 meters per second, and then their 80% is, you know, 80, or 7.6 meters per second. Well, my 80% that I can recover faster is faster than you, where my 100% and your 100% are two different categories. You're going to burn out quicker than I am. How do we get there? Right? That's my long way of going back to this of, well, we have to train fast as possible. We have to train strong. at some points in the year, we have to train as strong as possible. What do you do in the middle time? Right? And that's where like the power stuff lies, in my opinion. Right? A block work is trained at 100% intensity in the sport of track and field. You don't really take an exit out of blocks at about 30% because you're probably going to ingrain a lot of patterns that are really fucking ugly. And you're going to start to overreach because your body's not capable of continuing that speed. So I need you at 100% intensity. But because I'm only sending you 10 meters out, max speed you're probably going to accomplish is probably what, 60 to 65% of max speed. So therefore, the constraints that you're putting on it and the distance that you're sprinting limits the total exposure of max effort, or max output, I should say. My max effort is 100%, but my output is, say, 65. That's what power training is. Power training is limiting the constraints or putting constraints on something to give maximal intent, but at a sub-max intensity, if that makes sense. So intent and
Full
intensity, I
effort,
do separate.
submax intensity. Yeah, full intent,
Correct.
submax intensity, which is
Yeah,
controlled by the load on the bar or the resistance of the sprint that you're using, etc.
exactly. So what does that look like in a weight room? Well, I want you to move this bar as fast as possible, but I'm only putting 65% of that on, right? I still get a huge central nervous system stimulus. I'm still working through an explosive type movement, whether that be an Olympic lift, whether that be a jump or whatever. But by putting a load on there, I just want you to move it with that constraint on there. And you can strap a VBT on it and say, well, I need you to be at 0.99 meters per second, which Van Dyke, in I believe the power training book that he listed, was like the ideal, right? 0.99 is really close to one. So you use one as the basis
Yeah.
of the goal because it's easier to read. Well, great. I want you to load up as much as weight as you can and get to one because that's the speed at which I want you. When someone says train the end range, you train the middle. It's a tough pill to swallow, because there's a lot of things that you miss in the middle, and I think what you miss is, like, for example, like a front squat or a back squat, some squat pattern. If I train only max strength on that, you learn to push really, really hard, but you don't learn how to push really, really fast. And I'm a big believer in the fact that power training can build strength, but not vice versa. I think both belong in a program, but in the sport of track and field, for example, there's no, and everyone makes this joke, but there's no fucking squat rack on the 50-yard line. I need you to be able to move shit fast. I need you to move shit fast. Right? Now, the base layer could be strength training, and that can help you get the necessary strength in order to move a submax weight that was higher than before faster. That's a great idea. But if you don't train the said principle, the specific adaptation to impose demands, I need you to train that specifically. I need to put 65 to 70% on you, and I need you to move it as fast as possible. And we're going to repeat that over and over and over and over and over again, etc., all the way through, so that when you learn what a dynamic effort looks like and feels like. Because when it becomes an ingrained capability that is now subconscious, you operate on that level versus you feeling like you have to figure it out halfway through. You need to set your athletes up to prepare them for the sport. And if your sport requires them to move amount of mass in a very fast and dynamic fashion, you have to train that. That cannot be left out. And sometimes a lot of people try to simplify it and say, well, I'm going to let the sport do that. That's okay. You can do that. Are you training them to the best of your capabilities, though? And that's where you have the questions of, is that happening enough within the sport practice? If not, how do I address it? And that's when you start to get into like that power training. God, that was a
Yeah.
rant.
No, that was you just dropped the mic on that one. That was good.
I blacked out.
It's so interesting because like I like that Nick has the definition for explosives because like I guess I just think back to like the simple definition of power is just like work divided by time of like the physics realm. Which
Mm-hmm.
by definition, like everything that we do, like if I walk, I put force into the ground, and time is always passing. So technically, I'm producing power while just taking a walk. and I'm
Hmm.
producing power when I'm doing a 1 rep max on a back squat. I'm producing a lot of force, but it's taking me a lot of time. If I do a counter movement jump, I'm producing less force, but it's in a lot shorter time. The I was talking with someone about, how the force velocity curve is different from like a power curve. Um,
Hmm.
Usually when you see like a power curve, it's mostly flat with a little bit of a hump in the middle, which is where I think people are like, okay, let's focus on the middle after we touch both the ends, because if we can, and I think I you have you can't just be like, okay, I'm going to sprint and I'm going to lift maximal weights and never touch the middle. Whether you touch the middle for the reasons that you stated, or just be like, okay, like one, we know we can't just lift at 90% 1RM all year round. It's going to get fried. Um, and just like I feel like the lower loads, you're getting more repetitions. It's probably better, good for like tissue resiliency too, and being able to move those loads quicker with that constraint to get that middle ground. Um, but to me, it's just interesting to be like, okay, like a maximal effort lift and like a jump could produce the same power, but they're getting it in like a much different way. More force in more time, or less force but in a short amount of time. Could be about the same amount of power, um, but just in a different way. So it's definitely an interesting thing to think about. I agree with the fact that you've got to do both the ends, and then you definitely need to have some of that dynamic effort. I think that gets more important as athletes get more trained. Um,
Hmm.
I'm thinking like the guys that I work with, like some of them are like 17, and like if I tell them to the difference between, you've seen people that like the load moves the same at like 135 as it does at 185, and like they might be trying the same, but like they just can't move. They're weak enough that they don't know how to move dynamically.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. But I think as people get like an older training age, I think probably training in the middle a little bit more could make a little bit more sense. I don't think the people that say train the ends are necessarily wrong, because I doubt those people are just only training at like 85% plus of your max all year round. Everyone's doing somewhat middle range, even if that's not what they're like planning when they're trying to target power. Um, but yeah, still something I'm definitely like tossing around in my head, and like anything, like just trying to challenge, because I think when a lot of people think of power training, they okay, move light weights fast or move moderate weights fast, and like you said, if it's that 0.99, or like some people will say, okay, anywhere between like 40 and 60% of 1 RM, move it as fast as you can. I don't know. It's interesting, man.
The other thing that's forgotten about too, and I think this is where I don't want to say like my love for Cal Dietz, but my appreciation for what he does kind of plays into the part, is that a lot of stuff in the weight room is trained as like a singular bout, if that makes sense. Um, where it's like, hey, we're going to hit a single, a double, or a triple, right? For the most part, those take about four, 4 to 7 seconds, let's just say, right? But you're only hitting 3 reps in there. What's one of the common occurrences that happens in almost every single sport? Sprinting, right? How many, like, sprint speed is your stride length and your stride frequency, or your step frequency. How many people are taking the 3 strides in 7 seconds?
People that are too slow to play the sport.
Exactly. Probably. Or very untrained athletes who aren't covering enough ground and don't have enough, of the stride length. How do you flip that on its head? And that's when you start to get into like oscillatory movements or co-contraction based movements, right? Where it's not necessarily hit X amount of sets or X amount of reps, it's a time set. And it's
Hmm.
like, maybe we're only working the bottom half of the movement or the top half of the movement. You got 7 seconds. I need you to get as many reps as possible. Your goal is to try and get at least 1 rep per second, right? And whether that be with a dumbbell, a barbell, a band, whatever it is, you start to work into that power training or that speed training, however you load it, based off of those constraints. and you're trying to train the nervous system and the muscular contractions, whether it be via a PAP response, and you're trying to do one thing, then the other thing, whether it be heavy and then something speed oriented on the two ends of the range, or vice versa, and keep it two in the middle, whatever it might be. But what your goal is to get that action to contract and relax and contract and relax and contract and relax over and over and over again, because now you're increasing the overall athleticism that they can have refined in the sport. That's where I think a lot of people go wrong, because they see it and they go, well, this is just some like mumbo jumbo, like Instagram cute shit, when that might be just a small fraction of the training. And I know we've talked about this a lot, is you can never judge anyone based off of just one clip or one thing. They might be doing the strength stuff right before this, but now we're going to train them to move it as fast as possible, or train the ability to contract and relax as fast as possible. That's what sport is: contracting, relaxing, recontracting, and having that co-contraction of the agonist and antagonist musculature to flicker around and flicker off as fast as possible. The fastest athletes won't necessarily contract the fastest. Everyone can contract fast. The fastest athletes, or some of those best athletes that are able to do this long day in, day out, relax extremely well. And then they bring in that contraction back in again and again and again and again. And they're able to do that with a high central nervous system capability and the ability to shut something off, relax it, pull it through. Like if I've been talking about sprinting and sprinting and sprinting. That's just my love. That's whatever it is. But like we look at like the hip, right? Everyone really trains triple extension. How many people truly train triple flexion? And for some people who have gone out and about, I think we know who we're talking about, who scream about triple flexion in Olympic lift. You triple flex anytime you squat with your hips and your knees and your ankles. That's a triple flexion. How can I get that repeatedly? Tuck jumps, hurdle jumps, stuff like that. And I'm getting not only that, but the stretch shortening cycle. And I'm repeating that in an elastic type variant, right? There's different methods for everything. But the basis of this is that those athletes who can successfully do those will be inherently not necessarily going to be better athletes. You can't guarantee that, because the skill acquisition piece comes into that play. But you've now sent them off for that skill acquisition piece to be more set up now that they can, quote unquote, absorb. You can't really absorb force. You produce eccentric rate of force development. But you can, for lack of a better term, absorb, redirect, and produce force in a manner at which is extremely fast. You're probably more set up to do the required sporting actions, and you leave a lot more room for technical error, because your athletic capability can make up for it. Now, you want them to be more successful in the sport, so you want that margin to be low, but God forbid that they go into there with a higher margin. They're probably going to be more successful. I've been
masterclass,
I'm actually kind of sounding smart, and I don't know if it's the Red Bull with the monk fruit, the coffee, or the Zyn right now, but I got a concoction, like a little amalgamation inside my body right now that's firing everything on all cylinders. Hopefully this comes out as smart, and I don't just sound like Charlie Day just writing shit on a board, being like, "Where's Pepe Sylvia?"
I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. Shoot, yeah. I don't know if I can really add a whole lot else to that. More so me just like think about that and question my beliefs yet again.
I appreciate the question a ton, because there has been some self-doubt in me lately, and like actually like firing this out has made me feel better about how I've been training. And there's just that little aspect where it's like, okay, when someone else hears it and they go, wow, that's a good thought process.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's really all that matters. Like, obviously, I think you should always be playing devil's advocate for yourself to some extent. But just having a thought process behind is like at least a step in the right direction, even if you don't have it all figured out, which we will never all have it figured out. So,
yeah, I got one for you.
okay.
As a guy with relatively turtle shell abs, and I think as smart as my rant may have sounded, I think this is going to be the true banger of it, because this is going to apply to more people. right? We talk about the core. Don't really like the core. I don't like the name for that, but let's just say the trunk, the abdominals, and the obliques, right? And those like maybe the piriformis and psoas kind of going through there. How do you feel about like abdominal training? What's your stance on that versus like number one, do you just let the main movements and bracing aspects take care of it, or do you give a more direct stimulus? And do you do it every single day, or do you treat it like a different musculature or like every other musculature where you train it heavy and you give it rest? Like, what is your take on that? You got better abs than me, so I gotta ask you.
Yeah, I'd say like first off, we all know like the nutrition piece. Like everyone has abs. If you can't see them, it's because you're probably a little bit too fat. Uh, Genetics obviously also plays. Like you can't determine your own like muscle insertion. That's just kind of should have picked better parents. Sorry, dog. Uh, for me, like I feel like I used to train. I still do train my abs, and I think people should train their torso. Yes, the main movements by like properly bracing on deadlift, squats, bench, all that stuff. And I mean, whenever you're breathing, you're using your abdominals to a certain degree. But I think even if it's not to like get abs, like going into flexion, extension, lateral flexion, um, anti-rotation, rotation, that stuff is good. For me, I feel like I go when I see people just doing like crunches or sit-ups, that's like there's a better way to be doing that. I go back to just like the more you can take it through like a fuller range of motion and find some way to load that, the better it's going to be for that. I mean, the abs are like any other muscle. Like you can grow your abs. I think a misconception is like people want to say, okay, I want abs, I want abs. Like at a certain point, like your abs can get like super like bulky, and maybe that's not what you want. Like physique athletes, they don't really train their like I would say they might not train their obliques as much because they want that V taper. Um, and obviously the nutrition's probably the biggest piece there, but they'll train their abdominals. They won't train their like you don't see them doing like heavy ass dumbbell side bends because they don't want that blocky wide waist. Um, but like anything where you can take your your spine really, if we're talking about abs, put your spine into extension and then through full flexion, like the GHD sit up, or I like a good cable crunch with a rope where you're really like arching your back as much as you can, pause, and then just trying to literally roll your spine into a ball. That's like abdominal training when you really want to like train the abs. That's when you want to really like actually round the fuck out of your back. Um, Toes to bar too. That one's a little bit tougher because you're going to get a lot more like hip flexor and like piriformis, which is also good. I mean, it depends on if you're talking about like pure aesthetics versus like athletic
Performance.
performance. Yeah, I mean, if you want to train the abs, I'd say for more focus on bending the actual spine versus flexing the hips because the hip flexors piriformis iliopsoas is probably going to take over because it's just stronger. Um, but I train I'll say my torso multiple times a week. If for anyone that's trained abs, like you can train abs pretty much every day if you want. I tend to do more, not as much like static stuff. Like I'll do planks every like once in a blue moon, but not really. I feel like you get that static contraction from like bracing hard on like a squat or something like that. I do like the static stuff for like I'll do a lot of suitcase carries with like a kettlebell or like get a trap bar, load up one side um, for like some anti-lateral flexion. But I'll usually throw them in, towards the end of my workouts or on a day where I'm not really training, but like I still want to do something. Maybe I'll hit the bike for like 20, 30 minutes and then I'll do a little like circuit, okay, GHD sit ups, some form of offset carry, and then maybe like a pal off variation or some toes to bar, something like that. Ab rollouts. Those are two easy to go ab rollouts from the feet, just eccentric, and then come back in. Um, so yeah, I'm a fan of training. Obviously, like I don't want to say it's like all training because nutrition obviously plays a role, but like having strong abdominals is obviously like a good thing. So I say train static and dynamic, but I think if you really want to like build like more defined and like those kind of like Lego blocky turtle shell type of abs, emphasize more range of motion and then try to overload that. Like you do a full like GHD sit up, and then if you're able to load that, cable crunches, like I call them like candlesticks, where like you're halfway off a bench, curl up, put your legs straight up, and then really control that eccentric while you're extending your legs, stuff like that. And then for obliques, rotation, anti-rotation, like I said, the carries, dumbbell side bends, stuff like that. Um, but yeah, it's funny because I always hear guys will ask me like, "Hey, like, what exercise do I do for abs, like players?" And I'm like, first off, like, let's not worry about that. It's probably not the most important thing for you. I usually just give them stuff because the classic thing that the kids do down here is just like straight crunches. And like it's gotten to the point where I'm like, dude, like try this. They're having sets of 40 on crunches, and like, dude, do like 3 sets of 8, and you'll be sore for 3 days if you go full range on a GHD setup. Because I guarantee you've never gone through that before. Um, so, and I do think it plays into like if you never put your spine into like that extreme amount of like extension, flexion, stuff like that, I think that exposes you to a little more risk of injury, as well as like rotation. Obviously, baseball is a rotational sport. You see a lot of like oblique strains in pitchers and hitters. Obviously, I'd say that's more of a skill issue, like ramping up too quickly on the skill side. If you go from not really taking a lot of max intensity swings to hopping on a bat speed program where you're swinging as hard as possible,
Mhm.
probably gonna have a higher chance to like pull an oblique or something like that. But I do think like exposing those tissues to big ranges of motion, static and dynamic, and then maybe going like I'd say like the dynamic stuff kind of gets taken care of with the skill as far as baseball. Like I'm not gonna be able to do a kettlebell side band anywhere close to the speed that I'm going to swing with a baseball bat. So, but it does play a role, I'd say.
That's what I was kind of thinking in like the aspect, and you look to like what are the two types of athletes I should say that typically have like the most developed abdominals, right? You have physique competitors, number one, and number two, in all honesty, CrossFit athletes, right? They have two vastly different approaches to that training. Um, to whereas like a physique competitor, like you had mentioned, like Chris Bumstead actually talked about it in a video probably maybe a month ago, and he's like, I don't really train my abdominals because it's a muscle. It's going to get bigger. You want the V taper because it looks more like the prototypical, like ideal classic physique. He's like, so maybe I'll hit them every once in a while just for some kind of development. So they're not underdeveloped, but he's like, I don't really train like a ton because then I'll lose that V taper. And then you look at like a CrossFit athlete. What did you just mention, right? Full GHD sit-ups, that kind of thing, those carries. That is a quarter of like CrossFit style esque programming, or like what you see at like the games or whatnot, is the ability to completely round that spine, flex it, and get that moving. And then like a loaded carry of some sort, whether it be a suitcase, an overhead, or whatever, even a lunge fashion of that, like more like static bracing kind of effect. So like though there I think there's the two ways, and it's like for the average person, like when they're looking at like what kind of abs they want, that's how they should treat it. And if it's varied enough, then you can probably do it every day. But if it's similar enough to where it's the same kind of movement pattern, whether it be a flexion or just a straight up extension, or you're just constantly rotating, you might fatigue out or get some kind of overuse because the abdominals are, I don't know how many muscles off the top of my head. I think it's what, like 10 or 12?
Yeah, yeah. I don't usually do like I'll have one day where I'll do like carry with flexion, and then maybe another day I'll have like anti-rotation with rotation and stuff like that. Not like I'm doing it
Hmm.
every day, but like it's just someone that likes to train. Like if there's something that I can do, like it's not going to be super fatiguing. Like no, I need to take a rest day, but I still want to do something. Like I said, like do an ab workout, do a torso workout. Which some of
Hmm.
that stuff, like if I mean, it gets really hairy when you're talking about what is the torso slash core, whatever you want to call it. But like the muscles that attach to the pelvis, I think also get work, especially with like rotation and like a lot of power variations, which I think is also important. Plays a smaller role in like prepping the muscles of like the groin, and just like for hips too. You hear like core strength and core stability thrown around a lot, and I think a lot of times you probably won't find a super strong person that has a weak core just because if they can lift a lot on compounds. But I do think like for people that have like hip or groin issues, like that can, because you're always like moving from the middle in a sense.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of muscles that attach to that pelvis. So
I appreciate it.
yeah,
That'll be a
yeah,
good clip.
yeah. Ab masterclass on bad boys. Um, Slightly less intelligent from Brian's mic drop on sprinting and power training. But I do wanna ask one more, at least one
Hmm.
more thing. I got a few other things that we'll probably cover in later weeks, but this is one. Like asking our guests this question at the end, and I want to get your take on it, and I'll
Oh
give my
God,
take as well. So, what
please.
are what are our what are your like hot takes in S&C? What is the field getting wrong or missing the mark in your opinion? I'll give mine as well because we have been asking our guests this, and I think it's a really good question. Um, we got to answer our own questions. We gotta drink our own Kool-Aid, so to say.
That is true. I think I have mine. And at Team Builder, I have a mantra with my team, and this is it'll come back here, but my our mantra is solutions, not problems. And I think that's a lot of what the industry is the exact opposite. Everyone is very quick to point out a problem with the industry. Not a lot of people are quick to or even want to think about the solution to the problem, right? We think about overworked, underpaid, right? That's the number one problem that's typically out there. How many people are out there providing solutions to this problem or actively seeking the solution, right? They give a solution of, well, we need more people. Okay, but what if the school tells you you don't have funding? How do you find that, right? I think Sam Schmitz has a great idea with that, with the UGAs and using the student population, providing them some kind of funding, whether it be through the school or whatnot, and getting help from undergraduate assistantships. Interns, right? How do you not overwork an intern though and allow them to grow as an intern without having to just set up and put down a lift, right? You want to give them ownership of their program and give them opportunities to coach versus just set this up and show up and then shut up while I coach, right? That's one of those things where I think that's like the biggest thing in there. And then the sidebar of that is, well, this is the way it happened for me, so it's got to happen to you. Those are like my two big gripes in the industry. My path was super unconventional. I went from an undergraduate intern into getting a paid gig, albeit in the private sector, in a club sports setting, but coaching teams, not just individuals, and in private training classes. This was, here's your 14s, 15s, 16s, 17s, 18s, and then became a director, then was a director of 38 teams while I was getting my master's, and then changed to a track coach, went to a hybrid role, went back to being just a strength coach, and then now in a hybrid role again. And that's not the typical path, right? Everyone thinks internship, hopefully either paid intern or graduate assistant, and then part-time, full-time, director, etc. I got treated this way, you got to get treated this way because that's how it is. Instead of being like, well, I got treated this way, I should right that wrong. And it's this like perpetuating cycle of problems and problems and problems and problems, but never offer a solution to the problem. And I think that's the biggest thing is there's a lot of like not to hate on the industry, because there's a ton, if not most of the people in the industry are absolute unfathomably good people, right? But everyone has moments of weakness, or there's those few bad apples that ruin it for everybody, and they perpetuate the problem. Everyone can bitch, whine, moan, and complain, but what are you going to do about it? And maybe that's just like the Polish and Irish in me of like, nobody cares, fix it. But like, I think of like someone like my dad, right? Man went and built his own business leaving high school and did all this. When he's on a job site, he's not going to, he might bitch a little bit, but he's not going to sit there, bitch, whine, moan, and complain about a problem. He's going to go, what do I have to do to get this thing moving so we can get to the next piece? It becomes less about the problem itself, and it's what can we do about it right now in order to progress. I think we're stuck in the analysis of the problem so much versus like, let's try a solution and see if it works.
Yeah, that's really good.
I'm on an introspective path right now, dude. I don't know what's
Man,
going on,
yeah,
but
I don't know what you did you take some like some shrooms or something before this, Brian? You freaking write a whole philosophy book from this episode.
I ha- I've been reading too much leadership books. I read uh, both the Jocko books, and I've read the Leadership and Self Deception. It's too much. It's too much.
Okay, that makes
You
that makes a lot more sense.
you go.
Okay, so for me, yeah, that was really good, Brian. I think for me right now, it's a couple things, and I thought of this because I also do this, so it's not like I'm just like pointing out. I think anything that we think is wrong, like we were probably a part of at some point, or like we currently do it, or we do it from time to time, is
Mhm.
I think we as coaches sometimes lose the ability to think critically, um, and just regurgitate stuff that like other coaches, it's kind of a meme, like copy and paste program, but like I don't think we think critically enough at times about like why we're actually doing what we're doing. And it's tough because, everybody's got their own shit going on, during work, outside of work. It's easy to say like, okay, I know this worked before, instead of just, okay, this worked before, but how can it be better? Okay, why am I doing this? Am I still doing this, but doing it for a different reason? Do I understand that reason? And does that change anything else? Like actually critically thinking. And for me, another one that ties into this is like questioning and not being afraid to not only question yourself, but like question people that like maybe you looked up to and like you put them on this pedestal instead of thinking taking a step back and be like, whoa, okay, yeah, this is good information, but where could this person be not wrong, but where could they be missing the mark, and how can I improve on that? And what questions can you infer from that to help your thought processes and your procedures and outcomes, hopefully. So that's a big one. And then I think another one is you just talked about leadership books. I think coaches don't look outside of the field of S&C enough for advice and like stuff that they can take. We all love like reading stuff about training because like we obviously love training athletes or whatever our population. Most of us love to train ourselves. It's what's comfortable. It's what we know. A lot of that stuff probably, yeah, it's going to teach us a little bit, but a lot of it is going to just kind of reconfirm our biases, and it feels good like reading something that you already kind of have a really like good grasp on, or even maybe some coaches that have been in the field longer have just a mastery of like training concepts. But noticing that coaching is a lot more than just the X's and O's, and then like whenever you're dealing with people, like human nature and psychology is probably going to be the biggest factor because humans are so unpredictable. There's so much shit we don't know about like the human brain and how people um, just make decisions. And it's tough because like as a coach, you need to be able to impact so many different factors. There's psychology, there's the physical aspect, obviously, nutrition, relationships. But I think we don't look outside of our field for solutions. And this can be from like books or just like talking to people that have different perspectives in different fields. Maybe it's just because I'm on, I don't know if you've ever read the book Conscious Coaching by Brett Bartholomew. Um, I was going through some of his stuff a course that I took from him called, what is it, Bought In. He's got a lot of really good stuff about like, not, it has really nothing to do with the X's and O's of training, but more about like personality archetypes, how to get buy-in from athletes, persuasion and influence tactics, and just kind of like reminded me of how much, and even in my setting, like I'm not gonna lie, like working with since I started working in the DR with pretty much exclusively Latin players, and like knowing pretty much zero Spanish when I started, knowing more now, but still not where I need to be. I've realized that like the training, if it's good enough and I can find a way to communicate in the way like that I best can with where I'm at, building those relationships has been so much more effective than me being like, oh, like this rep scheme would be more optimal, blah blah blah. We could be doing this. It's a lot more about, I don't know. I knew it was about relationships before, but I think just like opening, with my experience over the past year or so has really kind of shed light on that. That like this thing goes a lot deeper than just percentages and like periodization schemes and stuff like that. So I think that's something we kind of can miss the mark on sometimes. Some people are better at it than others, but I guess that's something that I've been thinking about a lot, like reflecting on myself that I could do better, that I want to do better, and that other people are probably kind of in that same rut. So,
That makes me think of Mike Israetel. He went on a podcast, Ice Coffee Hour, which I love listening to. It's, Grant,
Yeah, Graham
Graham,
Stephan.
Graham
Graham
Stephan, yeah.
Stephan. Yep.
So his Ice Coffee Hour, it's a lot of financial talks, but they had Mike Israetel on there, which you want to talk about one of the most phenomenal podcasts I've ever seen. It's them like give a prompt, let Mike speak, and Mike's got a wild mind, and he is unbelievably smart. Now they talked about some training, but a lot of it just on his philosophy and his background of like coming from the Soviet Union over to Canada, back to America, and so on and so forth. But he made a really good piece that you kind of brought up, and I want to elaborate on. And that was humans are inherently flawed. We are a flawed being, and that's okay, right? That nobody's the idea that nobody's perfect, but I like the way that he presented it better is that humans are inherently flawed. We're very unpredictable. We're not stable, and if we were, it would be so sterile. It would provide no reality almost to that point. And this sounds crazy like a shroom talk right now, but um you have to learn to accommodate those flaws or challenge those flaws, whether it be via programming, the mannerisms, the characteristics, the abilities, whatever it might be, but challenge and accept those because we're going to learn something from them. Now, they were talking in the aspect of like if they were going to have, robots replace human beings with AI, and then people would have robotic and AI-esque partners instead of like having a human-human relationship. And essentially, he said, like, some people will do it, but most of the population won't because then it becomes too predictable. It becomes sterile, right? That's the same way with coaching. If we had 100 of the same athletes and that's all that you bring in, that's all you recruit, it becomes very sterile. It becomes very monotonous. There's no, for lack of a better term, there's no chaos, right? And you have to have that to become adaptable and to grow from that point. So you have to learn to develop those relationships with people that you don't necessarily even whether it be at first or just don't like in general or disagree with, right? But by doing that, it allows you to become a more I don't want to say like well-rounded because it sounds very cliche, but you become this person who is adaptable to these other personalities, and they see that there's an authenticity of you of not just mimicking them or being a chameleon, but genuinely having an interest in those people and forming that bond. Well, now you got someone who can run through a brick wall for you, right? And I've told you this when you were an intern with us, and that was you can probably get further with a bad program coached really fucking well than you will with a really good
100%.
within a really good program that's coached like shit, right? You can be a genius behind a computer, and the minute you get out there, no one has belief in it, right? And it's again, it sounds so cliche coming out of my mouth, but when a really good program meets a really good coach and you've developed true foundational relationships and genuine authenticity with your athletes, you have what they call the unicorn, where now you can test something, and those athletes have that belief in the system and the belief in you to where you can push them to their limits, and they're okay with that. And that's when you're going to get something just absolutely beautiful, whether it be training results, sport results, whatever it might be. But I agree with you in that point to where people aren't challenging the people they put on a pedestal. They're so fixated on X's and O's versus the authenticity and the relationship and the actual like intangibles of coaching. Right? A lot of the times, like especially on performance, sorry, I'm cutting you off right now.
Good.
A lot of times in performance podcasts such as ours, like we talk a lot about X's and O's. How do you do this? What do you do this? Why do you do this? But we often forget about that human aspect, and that just an example. That's an example of that flaw, and we don't really address that.
Yeah. I mean, how many times have you, or like, sure, everyone's gone through this, where you have an athlete that's not really bought in, whatever you want to call it, and you just kind of write it off as, like they're soft, like they're like, you don't look in the mirror and ask how you could be the problem, or you don't look into it and be like, okay, like this person's obviously a little bit different. How do I approach their psychology different? Maybe what motivates them? How can I communicate with them on a level that's gonna, I mean, at the end of the day, we're trying to get people to do what we want them to do in the way we want them to do it, and have them not hate us. I feel like that's a big part of it. And like, there's a good quote that I came across when I was looking over these materials from that bonding course. It says, "Coaching is an art guided by science." And I think a lot of times we get it kind of flipped around. Like the science comes first, but it says coaching is an art guided by science. And I feel like that's so true because like you said, humans are so unpredictable, and that's always going to be the biggest factor in anything dealing with people. Um, so yeah, it's tough, man. But I think also it's uncomfortable to like confront that, like like because we want to feel like you're the coach, you've gone through X amount of internships, you've done all this schooling, you do all this con ed, you kind of want to feel like, okay, I have it figured out, but it's uncomfortable to be like, okay, this is kind of a blind spot of mine and I don't really know a whole lot about it. So you can either ignore it and keep having that problem pop up, or you can go, okay, beginner mindset, let's actually try to learn about some of this stuff and, swallow your pride for a second and be better, not only for yourself, but more importantly for your athletes and the people around you. Um, and that's tough too. I don't know how many times, like, I feel like we get into ruts of, oh, you write something off as less important than it probably is just because you don't understand it, and you don't, that like hurts your ego that like, oh, something that's involved within your domain isn't completely within your wheelhouse, so it's probably eyewash. Think of any single like training system, um like I'm thinking like in baseball, like a lot of the PRI stuff is big, like wide versus narrow ISA. And like at first I was like, like this shit is like kind of sounds like a little eyewash. And maybe it is, but I was like, okay, I probably can't say that. I think I'm probably saying that because some of the stuff is pretty like complicated, and I haven't taken the time to actually dig into it. So got to take a step back and kind of like check yourself. And that's tough to do. Everyone's got ego. It's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. We just got to know when to let that guide our decisions and when to take a step back and keep it in check. So
We're gonna save this piece for another episode, but the art guided by science. There was another podcast where one of the guests brought up that sports science isn't is it's a pseudoscience, for lack of a better term, and that it's really not us sitting in a lab and doing constant like formulations and testing, but it's like a lot of guessing at the start. But I want to get into that. That's going to be its own thing because we'll be in
yeah,
a 35-minute, 40-minute rant on that. I
100%.
think, I think we ran over today, but should we wrap this thing up?
Yeah, this was a banger. Especially for we've been on a roll lately. We've had some, like we said, we had some sick guests. But we I feel like we kind of kind of hit a banger, which is the two of us today. So obviously, guys, huge thank you for you guys watching. What are we thinking about that Red Bull, by the way, Brian? Kind of forgot about that thing.
I know. Honestly, I like the can better than the old can. That's a big hit for me. I think it looks a lot sicker. It's modernized the can a little bit with the flat kind of colors, that like opaque kind of like sky blue versus like that chrome light blue.
Hmm.
Taste wise, I think I like it better. Than It's less acidic. It's a little bit smoother. You still get that nice little bubble in there. I would. It's hard to say. Like, have we reviewed the regular Monster, or the regular Red Bull Zero?
I don't know if we have. I know we've done the cinnamon pear Red Bull.
We did do the
Just thinking
cinnamon
about
pear.
that the other day. That shit was low-key fire.
That was really good. I did like that. I like their like winter flavors a ton. Um, if I were to, I'll rank it in congruence with the original Red Bull Zero. If the regular Red Bull Zero, the original, say is a 6.7, I would give the Red Bull Zero like a 6.9. It holds out because of the price and the lower caffeine content, but the flavor is better. The can looks better. Um, it's solid. If it was cheaper, more readily available with a little bit more caffeine, I would say it'd probably be in those mid sevens, especially with the revamp with the monk fruit. But a 6.9 would be where I'm going with this.
6.9. Nice.
Nice.
Nice. Yeah, I don't feel like I don't need to give this one a review. My favorite DR sparkling ice energy drink. Tastes
Mm-hmm.
like a Sprite. Nothing special though. But yeah, guys, huge thanks for supporting the podcast. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, give us a good rating on Apple Podcasts. Send it to a friend. Like on YouTube. Subscribe if that's the platform you're listening on.
Follow on
Follow us.
Spotify.
Follow on Spotify. Instagram, bevboys.tv for clips of upcoming episodes or even past episodes that maybe you missed but could glean some good information from. And those are also associated with our personal Instagram accounts. So you can find me at French_Fit40. So Bev Boys content along with, traditional performance content or just random stuff that I decide to post. And you can find Brian on Instagram at
BSZUTKOWSKI. Same thing. Bad Boys content on there, as well as I got to pick it up. You've been killing it lately on your content for your personal side, but I gotta start getting back into it. I've been a little bit lazy with the season kind of going on, but a lot of gym content, sprinting s content as well. So should be a good follow if you're looking to learn a little bit more from either of us. French is an absolute genius. The actual hanging video that he posted the other day
yeah,
was thought provoking to say the least.
yep. Don't take that the wrong way. I know there's someone that's gonna take that the wrong way.
No,
Hanging
it
video.
was he was hanging from barbells, getting the shoulder ready, a lot of scapulothoracics kind of stuff, and super
Yeah,
good. And I started thinking about it for like some of the people who throw with us, like jab throw or shot, all that kind of good stuff. So if you're looking to question some things or learn more, follow either of us. Follow bevboys.tv, obviously. Hit up the best website in the entire world, bevboys.com. Pick up a shirt. So our last guest had the banger original hoodie on him, so that was fantastic to see. Get yourself, you guys, one, because websites aren't cheap, and we pay to keep that thing up. And so help us
that's
out
right.
here a little bit.
That's right. Help your boys out. But yeah, that's gonna wrap it up for us, guys. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Peace.
Peace.